Right. I was at the temple yesterday and thought, hey, I should talk about Psalm 9. I'm actually just barely starting to read about it, so here we go. The reason I am picking it is because it's the first one listed in this book, Linguistic Evidence for the Northern Origins of the Psalms. And basically, based on this author, he states this whole psalm came from kind of the north. There's lots of linguistic markers in it. Now, Gary Rensburg, he has this course on Audible about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I thought it was amazing. Kind of has a twist ending where, like a M. Night Shyamalan ending. It's really cool. I don't think he was going for that, but it just talks about the time and the text and what the texts mean and the culture. So I thought that was really well done. I didn't totally agree with the spin ending. I thought it was kind of harsh, but anyway. He studies Hebrew, and I guess there's lots of Hebrew marks, like dialects, that indicate a northern origin. So we turn to this, Psalm 9. It says it's written by David, right? So why would a song by David be in the north, or written in a northern dialect? As we know, the scribes were able to update the text for specific dialects. Emmanuel Tove talks about that, and he's analyzing the Dead Sea Scrolls, that it was very normal for scribes in the First Temple period to update texts. And so this could have originated in the south, but this is the northern version. Or perhaps, David traveled to the north and said this. Alternatively, I guess you'd ask, well, where's the southern version? And that, obviously, I don't have an answer to that. Or why didn't it get updated back to the southern version after a while? They kind of no longer allowed textual changes, and as they got into the Second Temple period. Sorry about that. It kind of resonates with me because we view ourselves as, kind of children of Ephraim, and so this would be a text near and dear to our fathers. And obviously there's other parts that are also northern origin in the Bible, but this would also be a text probably on the brass plates that was the key. And so we can hopefully see themes and see what kind of goes together. I'll just read a few verses. I will praise thee, O Lord, with my whole heart. I will shew forth all thy marvelous works. In verse 3, when mine enemies are turned back, they shall fall and perish at thy presence. So that's interesting to me that David's saying that. I don't know if this is before he's king or after, but especially if it's after, we think, oh, his life must be great, he's king, but he talks about lots of enemies, so I don't know if there was lots of intrigue in the court, and I can't imagine his life was simple. What's also interesting is that his enemies will perish at God's presence. So, this is a guy who has an army and has done several military campaigns, but really that's what he's hoping for is God's presence, and he trusts in that. So, and he does that in verse 4 because God satiates himself in judging right. David talks about how God is his refuge, a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble, because those who know God's name put their trust in him. And so because of that, he also says, sing praises to the Lord, declare among the people his doings. So I think the people who know God's name are the people who know God's works, God's power. Really, if you're familiar with God and you know he's going to be successful, he's going to judge righteously, and he's going to eventually avenge those who are like the poor who are robbed and things like that, you'd want to put your trust in them. But of course, it seems to always take God a while to come. But that's what David's praying for. But it's very essential that we know and we discuss God's doings. That seems to be key for faith, just the promotion of faith while we're being oppressed. That's sort of a refuge. I'm going to keep going on. Then it talks about kind of the evil people, which they call heathen. So heathen are just people who don't know the ways of the Lord, which his ways always work. And it talks about verse 15, the heathen are sunk down in the pit that they made. So I looked up that word pit, and pit there is Satcheth, which is basically a pit you would dig for like an animal, like a trap. So if I'm trapping an animal, I could dig a pit and they'd be stuck in it. But what it's saying here is that heathen are sunk down into the pit that they made. So this is very much kind of reminiscent of, the wicked will fall into the pit that they dig themselves. And what's, I guess, sad about that is that in a pit, they're helpless. So the wicked won't be able to get their desires to come about because they're in a pit. But ironically, it was them digging the pit that made it. So I'm going to move on to 17. The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all nations, and the nations that forget God. So the wicked shall be turned into hells. Hell is helplessness and ignorance. We'll go into that, but hell, that's, we always think of fire, but obviously that was how they would think of this. The word was Sheol, which also meant pit, but Jonah uses the word Sheol when he's talking about being stuck in the belly of the whale. And also I think it's in Proverbs or Psalms where it says when you're in the presence of ignorant people or people of folly, you're in Sheol. So we learn from Nephite that hell can be in this life. Basically, hell is just a period when you're helpless or ignorant, or really it really goes along well with the imagery of the pit. So basically, hell, the wicked will become helpless. That's all it's really saying. And it's because of their ignorance. They can't help themselves. And why? Well, in verse 18, because the needy shall not always be forgotten. So basically, the wicked keep hurting the needy. God's gonna, help them out. And the wicked are gonna realize what they're doing isn't helping themselves. They're not helping anybody. And so they're just gonna be, helpless. Okay, I'll finish this video up, hopefully without too many tangents. I think it'd be best to end with a summary. So we've got a king. The king is hoping God will help him. So that's interesting. He's not, thinking just his armies are enough. So that's sort of very, I guess, passive or very trusting, that David is really waiting for God to help him out. And then as far as overthrowing his enemies, you might wonder, well, why is God on David's side? David doesn't say, doesn't mention his previous good deeds. He doesn't mention really, like the Davidic covenant or something like that. But towards the end, he says that God will help because he won't always let the poor be, forgotten. And so that kind of implies that David, his goals are also to help the poor. Presumably if that's why God is going to intervene, because the poor won't always be forgotten. And presumably that's also David's goal. Okay, so this really big concept of the wicked digging pits or even traps for their neighbors. Well, and they're just going to fall into those pits themselves. So it's not that it's so much evil or enticing so much as it is just not helpful. It doesn't help your neighbor, and unfortunately it doesn't help you either, So that's what God wants us to declare, is to declare God's doings, which is the doings of justice. And the doings basically say, hey, if you do good for your neighbor, then you'll be rewarded and your neighbor will be rewarded. So that's what we need to declare. Now, I really put this together with the Saints of Missouri. I always kind of had issue with the fact that they were supposed to ask for redress, because I thought, especially if they're trying to move on or forget about it, it's not easy to go ask for redress or relive those things, especially if it's going to be not useful. But I think part of the reason God wanted them to ask for redress is because that is a way of telling the people, hey, these people were wronged, meaning the saints, they were wronged, can you please help them out? And so in that setting, they will kind of finalize who they are, what they want to do, and then God can interact appropriately. That I presume is also what David is kind of referencing. David mentions, lots of enemies. He mentions declaring the doings of the Lord. Then he mentions waiting for God to help him out. And he mentions the doings of, we'll say, the wicked or the heathen, which is this digging pits. And so that's kind of the reality that, I guess, David sees. He doesn't see a reality where he can, go crush his enemies with his armies. That's just not going to help him or anybody. He sees a reality where his, I guess, key to growth and faith and success is by declaring the doings of God and by waiting and staying kind of firm in that faith, and by not harming his neighbor. The last thing he would want to do would be to harm his neighbor as well, or harm the poor. So those are the kind of dynamics and the topics here, I think. Okay, so I realize I need to clarify two things. One is it's not clear who the poor are all the time, and it's not clear who's helping all the time. So you could be spiritually poor, or poor, we'll say in love, or poor, physically poor. So hopefully the Bible will flesh this out, and I'll try to explore that concept, like who are the poor and how are we supposed to be helping them. I assume we're supposed to share our spiritual gifts, things like that. And so if I was, for example, a person who owned a lot of trailers in a trailer park, if I had 100 trailers, I could actually be a person who is helping and letting 100 families live and grow, and that'd be great. Or I might be running this trailer park in a way that is really holding them all down. So it's not clear just from a profession, like the title of a profession, if you're helping or hurting the poor. I think on an individual basis, you have to know, and you have to be attentive to the Spirit. And then also how to help the poor. That's always tough, because this could sound like enabling. Are we doing good when we're enabling people? And kind of no, by definition, but then what is helping? And a quick answer before we flesh this out, hopefully in future chapters, is helping in a way that is sustainable. So those people aren't taking advantage of their neighbor, like they're not doing, let's say, pyramid schemes. They're not digging pits, but they're becoming successful by helping others be successful. And so basically, is the help sustainable? And that's the big question, I think. And hopefully we all think about how we can help people around us, and we can also identify ways in which we are poor, maybe poor in spiritual gifts, and we can identify the spiritual gifts given to people around us, and we can, capitalize, or at least profit from that. And we'll hopefully tune in next week or the week after. Thanks. Bye.